They say the warp devours all things that dream too brightly. In the endless dark between stars, faith burns hotter than fire, and the soul itself becomes a weapon. But what happens when a being forged in damnation, a creature of vengeance already scarred by hell, is cast into a galaxy where gods are real and madness has form? Imagine Spawn, the Hellspawn, the fallen soldier reborn in infernal fire, hurled across realities, his chains dragged through the Imperium, his soul torn between Earth's inferno and the howling abyss of chaos. In the 41st millennium, there is no redemption, only the long, slow unraveling of what it means to be human. And in this place, where demons wear the faces of gods, even hell itself might kneel before the ruinous powers. If you find yourself drawn to the darker corners of the galaxy, to stories where faith and damnation walk hand in hand, then join us. Like, share, and subscribe to descend deeper into this world, where lore breathes like scripture and every whisper might damn a soul. Because today we ask the forbidden question: what if Spawn was claimed by chaos? The first sound was not a scream, though it should have been. It was the grinding of chains, a metallic rasp echoing through an infinity that had forgotten sound. The air, if such a thing could exist between realities, vibrated with the slow heartbeat of something monstrous and eternal. Spawn felt it before he understood it, the sensation of being unmade. His necroplasmic flesh, once bound to Earth's infernal order, was torn apart by a current that did not obey the laws of heaven or hell. It was the warp, though he did not yet know the word. A sea of thought and nightmare, living hunger and divine madness pressing against him from every direction. There was no up, no down, no passage of time. Only motion, as if he were falling forever through a wound in creation. He tried to scream, but the noise was stolen by colors that bled and screamed themselves. Faces flickered around him, some familiar, others impossibly vast, their features written in language made of agony. A seraph whose wings burned with unlight, a horned giant whose eyes were twin suns bleeding into the void, a child's laughter that turned into the roar of artillery. The warp was a mirror to every horror the soul could imagine, and Spawn's soul was already fractured beyond repair. When he hit the surface, or if one could call that writhing membrane a surface, the impact was soundless but absolute. The necroplasm within him ignited in reflex, forming armor, chains, and cloak from raw instinct. But the material rebelled. The energies here did not obey the infernal command of Malabolgia. The warp was older, freer, and infinitely crueler. His armor shifted like something alive, veins of red and black crawling under its surface, drinking the madness around it. The rune on his chest flickered, its glow-changing hue, no longer hellfire red, but a deep, abyssal crimson that pulsed in rhythm with the storm around him. He rose, though gravity had no meaning, and the chains that had once obeyed his will now swayed as if listening to some distant rhythm. In the distance, mountains of screaming glass and rivers of liquid thought tore themselves apart and reformed in the same heartbeat. Spawn's mind was fracturing, but his rage kept him anchored. Rage was the one constant that had survived even death. It was the ember of his humanity, buried under the ashes of betrayal. He remembered flashes, the gunfire that tore his body apart, the bargain struck in desperation, the infernal throne that made him a slave. He had been a weapon once, forged in hell's fire and unleashed upon the innocent and the damned alike. But this place, this void of infinite reflection, did not care about his story. Here even gods were unmade. A voice reached him then, not through sound but through memory. It was the whisper of his wife's name, Wanda, spoken in a tone that carried both mercy and mockery. He turned, but there was no one. Only the echo of her smile suspended in the liquid air, her eyes hollowed into voids of golden flame. "Do you remember me?" the voice asked, and before he could answer, her face split apart, revealing 1,000 smaller faces beneath, each a demon's mask. Spawn attacked out of reflex, his chains snapping forward, their motion slicing through space like lightning. But they met no resistance. They passed through the illusion and struck something vast and unseen. The warp answered with a roar, and suddenly the faces became stars, the stars became eyes, and the eyes stared into him. His necroplasm screamed in response, feeding on the energy, drinking it in greedily. He realized then that this place was not merely watching him, it was testing him. The warp, the Imperium, the ocean of chaos itself. It was alive, and it wanted to know what he was. He could feel its judgment pressing against his mind like a blade. Hell had made him a soldier. The warp wanted to make him something else entirely. Then through the storm came form. A figure walking as though gravity still mattered. Towering, armored in plates of obsidian and bone, the being's presence bent the madness around it into order for a fleeting instant. Its voice emerged like a forge breaking through silence. "You do not belong here," it said, each word reverberating with the weight of aeons. Spawn steadied himself, chains coiling like serpents ready to strike. "I didn't belong there either," he answered, though his words felt small against the storm. The figure tilted its head. Beneath its helm, twin embers glowed, not with the warmth of fire, but the cold certainty of divinity. "Then perhaps you will find belonging in the ruin," it said, and reached out a hand that dripped with molten shadow. When it touched him, the world exploded. Spawn's scream tore through the fabric of the warp like a blade. The necroplasmic energy within him convulsed, and for a heartbeat, if heartbeats could exist here, he saw everything. The four thrones, Khorne seated upon a mountain of skulls, roaring his endless war cry, Nurgle smiling in the Garden of Rot. His laughter like the sound of decay, Tzeentch the eternal schemer, his form a storm of shifting wings and flame, and Slaanesh the Whisperer, radiant and monstrous in beauty. Each god turned their gaze upon him. For the first time since his rebirth, Spawn felt small. The figure withdrew its hand, leaving a mark upon his armor, a shifting, pulsating sigil that burned with the hues of all four gods and yet none of them. "Now you are seen," the figure said. "Now you are marked." Spawn collapsed, his body trembling, his mind alight with visions. His armor was no longer his own. It throbbed with a rhythm he couldn't silence, each pulse echoing the heartbeat of chaos itself. He understood dimly that he had crossed a threshold that could not be undone. The warp accepted him. And somewhere, far beyond the madness, something, or someone, whispered in the dark. A new prince of ruin is born. When consciousness returned, it came not as mercy but as weight, a crushing, suffocating gravity that drove Spawn's body into something solid and cold. The air smelled of rust and oil, thick with the residue of war. His vision swam, adjusting to a sky the color of bruised steel. He lay sprawled on what looked like a field of broken armor and shattered bones, the remnants of something vast and ancient. Above him, a half-collapsed manufactorum stretched toward the storm, its spires bent and split by time. The warp had spat him out into reality once more, though reality was too generous a word for this ruin. Spawn staggered upright, his body still pulsing with the echo of the mark seared into his chest plate. It glowed faintly beneath the layers of necroplasmic armor, a symbol alive and watching. His senses, heightened beyond mortal comprehension, spread outward like a ripple. He could feel the taint of the warp bleeding through this world, taste its corruption in the air. The ground beneath him trembled faintly, as if alive with the memory of bombardments. Somewhere nearby, something mechanical groaned. Not the sound of gears, but of a wounded beast wearing metal as flesh. His chains flexed instinctively, scanning the horizon. He could feel them trembling, hungry. They responded to him, but also to something else, something that now whispered at the edge of his thoughts, words in no language he knew, yet perfectly understood. A promise, a demand, a hymn. The storm broke then, and from the ruins emerged figures, gaunt silhouettes cloaked in ash, moving with the deliberate rhythm of men who had forgotten fear. The first raised a weapon, a lasgun, dull and battered but steady. Their armor bore the sigil of the Astra Militarum, though much of it was obscured by grime and the slow corrosion of years. Behind them more appeared, spectral in the half-light, forming a loose ring around him. "Identify yourself," one barked, his voice muffled through a damaged vox grill. "This world is under quarantine by order of the Segmentum Command." "State your allegiance." Spawn said nothing. His cloak whipped in the wind, chains twitching like living tendrils. The soldiers hesitated. The air shimmered faintly around him, bending as though heat radiated from his form, but it was not heat. It was the echo of the warp still clinging to him, wrapping him like a second skin. One of the troopers muttered a prayer, a fragment of Imperial liturgy meant to banish corruption. The others followed, their voices rising in a discordant chant. To them, he must have looked like a demon, and in truth, perhaps he was. "I said identify yourself." The officer shouted again, raising his lasgun higher. Spawn tilted his head. When he spoke, his voice was low, resonant, not human. "You wouldn't believe me." The officer hesitated, then gave the order. The air cracked with las fire. Bolts of red energy seared through the mist, striking his armor, burning holes in his cloak. Spawn barely flinched. The necroplasm drank the energy greedily, sealing each wound as fast as it formed. When he lifted his hand, it glowed faintly green, pulsing with internal light. He did not intend to kill them, not yet. But the warp within him had its own will. Chains erupted outward, moving faster than the soldiers could react. They wrapped around one, dragging him screaming into the air, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Another tried to run, too late. The chains crushed him with a sound like bones under iron. The rest fled, shouting into their vox links, calling for support. Spawn stood among the bodies, smoke rising from the ground around him. He looked at his hands that had once been human, and felt the tremor of something deeper than rage. He was losing control. The necroplasm was not just alive. It was changing, evolving under the influence of the warp's mark. His armor's runes shifted like liquid, and for a moment he thought he saw the faint outlines of skulls forming across its surface. The wind carried distant sounds. The thrum of engines, the metallic clatter of treads on rock, reinforcements. But there was something else in that sound, a deeper rhythm, like drums. Korn's drums, he knew it before he could name it. The air vibrated with bloodlust, a psychic resonance that stirred even his corrupted essence. The mark on his chest flared, reacting to the presence. He turned, and through the rolling mist he saw them. Crimson armor gleaming beneath the stormlight, crested helms and chain axes dripping with oil and gore. The berserkers of the World Eaters. They came in formation, not disciplined but driven. The organized chaos of murder given purpose. The troopers who had survived their first encounter with Spawn turned to face the new threat, shouting orders that were drowned by the roar of chain blades. The berserkers hit them like a tidal wave, their laughter drowned by the sound of tearing metal and ruptured flesh. Spawn watched, unmoving, as the slaughter unfolded. The warp whispered again, louder now, its tone intoxicating. See them, feel them. You are kin to them. He took a step forward without realizing it. The mark on his chest burned brighter, resonating with the carnage. The berserkers sensed him. Their leader turned, helm horns curved like the tusks of some ancient beast. For a moment their eyes met, one pair burning with rage, the other with something that had forgotten what it was to be human. The leader's vox grill crackled, his voice like gravel dragged through blood. Another warrior of the blood god? He said, or pray. Spawn's reply came like the edge of a blade. Try me, they clashed. The berserker swung his chain axe in a brutal arc, sparks scattering as it bit into Spawn's armor. Spawn countered, his chains whipping forward, binding the weapon mid-swing. He yanked hard, pulling the warrior off balance, then drove a necroplasmic spike through his breastplate. The energy detonated, ripping through ceramite and flesh alike. The other berserkers roared and charged, their war cries echoing across the dead plain. Spawn met them head-on, his movements fluid, unnatural, not like a man fighting, but like a storm responding to gravity. Every strike left fire in the air, every motion twisted reality just enough to make the world flinch. When it ended, the field was silent. Spawn stood alone among the corpses, his armor dripping with blood that hissed as it touched the ground. The mark on his chest pulsed slowly, feeding on the death around him. In that moment he understood that something had changed. The warp had not merely claimed him, it had introduced him, and somewhere far beyond the veil of real space a god of war smiled. The dead lay silent, but their echoes lingered. Each corpse radiated a dim shimmer in the warp, the afterimage of violence that refused to fade. Spawn stood amid the carnage, chains slack, cloak torn and heavy with blood. The mark on his chest pulsed faintly, its rhythm mirroring the heartbeat of something vast and watching. He had not asked for the gift, yet it bound itself to him like destiny. Around him the storm had calmed, though the sky still churned with crimson clouds that never stopped moving. The world, whatever forsaken planet this was, seemed to breathe in tandem with his thoughts. When he closed his eyes, he could feel the surface crawling beneath, not with insects or roots, but with veins of psychic residue. It was as though the entire world were alive, its soil steeped in centuries of death and devotion. The warp bled freely here, shaping the air into dreams and memories not his own. He saw flashes of what had come before, titans burning in the distance, manufacture a belching smoke until their chimneys collapsed. Prayers to the Emperor twisted into madness by static and despair. He moved without direction. The bodies of the world eaters crumbled into ash as he passed, their blood already seeping into his armor. He could feel it sinking deeper than metal, merging with the necroplasm itself. The armor responded, it changed. Where before it had been rough and jagged, it now seemed alive, the plates shifting and interlocking with a fluid precision that felt almost purposeful. Lines of scripture appeared across the gauntlets, written in a language he did not recognize, glowing faintly before fading back into the surface. Spawn flexed his fingers, testing the motion. The armor obeyed, but sluggishly, as if something else now shared command. "You're feeding on them," he muttered, though whether he spoke to the armor or the presence within it he could not tell. His voice echoed unnaturally, distorted by the weight of the warp. He began to walk toward the horizon, not out of hope, but instinct. The landscape stretched endlessly, a wasteland of wreckage and bones, but the further he moved, the more the world seemed to change. The ruins grew stranger, the shapes less human, structures bent at angles that defied gravity, their surfaces etched with sigils that pulsed faintly as he passed. It was as though he walked through the fossilized dream of a god. Then came the voice. It was not the whisper of the warp, that endless background hum of insanity, but something more focused, intimate. A voice that slid directly into the space behind his thoughts. It was calm, ancient, and amused. "You wear our mark well," Spawn froze. "Who?" The laughter that followed was neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel. "You have no need of names. You already carry ours." A vision unfolded before his eyes, not of the world around him, but of the warp beyond it. 4 vast shadows shifting through the Imperium like continents of thought. Each radiated its own terrible beauty: blood, change, decay, desire. 4 notes of the same endless song. "You were born in hellfire," the voice continued, "forged by a lesser power. You were made to serve, but you serve no longer. You are untethered. You are raw, and raw souls are precious here." Spawn clenched his fists. "I've served enough masters." "Then serve none," the voice said, silk turning to steel. "But know this, we have seen what you could become. Each of us sees differently. Korn sees a weapon that does not tire, a perfect engine of war. Nurgle sees rebirth in your decay. Tzeentch sees in you a paradox that even he cannot predict. And Slaanesh," the tone softened, almost intimate, "Slaanesh sees beauty in your pain." Spawn spat into the dust. "You think you can tempt me with poetry?" The world laughed with the voice, an echo that rippled through the ground itself. "Temptation is for the uncertain. You already carry the mark. You are a vessel now, whether you will it or not." The sigil on his chest ignited. The heat drove him to his knees, and for a moment he saw through it. Saw them, the 4 thrones aligned in the void. Each god leaned closer, their attention unbearable, their gazes burning through the veil of his being. He screamed without sound as the armor began to move of its own accord. Chains lashed outward, carving patterns into the dirt. Each strike left behind lines of fire that twisted into a symbol, an 8-pointed star. When it ended, Spawn collapsed, gasping. The mark beneath his armor throbbed like a second heart. The star burned on the ground before him, its light fading slowly into the soil. He stared at it, and for the first time since entering this galaxy, he felt the shadow of understanding. The 4 did not offer worship, they demanded resonance. They were less gods than gravitational forces of sin and will, pulling all things toward their nature. He was not yet theirs, but he was becoming something they desired. Above, lightning split the clouds, revealing something in the distance, a fortress of iron and bone, half buried in the dust, its walls covered in skulls both human and otherwise. Spawn felt its call immediately, an instinctual pull that hummed through the mark on his chest. He began to walk toward it, each step heavier than the last. As he moved, he felt the gaze of unseen watchers. The warp shifted subtly around him, not hostile but curious. And somewhere deep within the fortress ahead, something stirred in response. The mark of the gods had not merely chosen him. It had summoned something waiting for him to arrive. The fortress loomed against the blood-red horizon like a wound in the world, its walls breathing faint vapors that shimmered with the color of old bruises. The skulls embedded within its surface seemed to twitch as he approached. their hollow sockets tracking his movements in perfect silence. The structure was colossal, rising in uneven tiers, part manufactorum, part cathedral, part tomb. The air around it hummed with residual warp energy, thick enough to taste, copper, ash, and the faint sweetness of decay. Spawn halted before a gate shaped like a screaming mouth, its teeth wrought from blackened ceramite. The gate's surface pulsed faintly, alive with veins that pumped viscous tar-colored blood. The sigil on his chest glowed in response, and the gate opened without sound. A tide of air washed over him, hot and metallic, carrying whispers that slid through his armor and into his bones. Inside was no hall but a labyrinth. Corridors of shifting geometry stretched in every direction, the walls alive with movement, reshaping themselves as he passed. Lights flickered, not electric but psychic, born from the dreams of things that were once human. The air buzzed faintly with chanting, a hymn without a source. It was not Imperial Gothic. It was older, heavier, sung in the language of chaos. Spawn walked with deliberate steps, his chains slithering behind him, the echo of his boots muffled by the pulse of the living floor. He felt watched, but not by eyes. The scrutiny came from thought itself. The warp's attention coiled around him like smoke, curious and cautious in equal measure. At intervals, doors opened without reason, revealing chambers full of static visions. Warriors kneeling before gods, demons feasting on memory, cities burning in reverse as if time itself recoiled from their destruction. Each vision lingered for a heartbeat before collapsing into nothing. At the end of one corridor he found an altar. It was constructed from the remnants of weapons. Bolters, chain axes, power swords, all fused together into a single structure that pulsed with a dark rhythm. Upon it sat a single object, a helm wrought of black iron inscribed with faintly glowing runes. It was not of human make. Its design was brutal, primal, reminiscent of the World Eater's armor, yet refined, as though crafted for something greater. He reached for it. The air shivered. The voice returned. You walk the path between gods and ghosts. His hand hovered above the helm. Show yourself. You have seen us. You wear our mark. You need not see more. The runes on the helm flared, casting the chamber in crimson light. Shadows danced along the walls, forming shapes, monstrous, familiar, divine. 4 silhouettes overlapping but distinct. Each turned toward him in silence. You have spilled blood, and it has sung our praises. You have resisted decay, yet carried it within you. You have defied order, and so please change. You have endured pain and made of it art. You are all and none. You are contradiction made flesh. Spawn clenched his fists. You want to own me, just like the other one did. The shadows rippled, and the laughter that followed was vast, layered, and terrible. We do not own. We elevate. He laughed bitterly. You destroy. That's all you are. Destruction is creation's oldest truth. The chamber trembled. The altar cracked down the middle. Spawn stepped back as the helm rose into the air, spinning slowly. From within it poured light. Not bright, but heavy. A radiance that pressed against him like a hand. He tried to resist, but the mark on his chest betrayed him. It flared, chains bursting outward, wrapping around his arms and dragging him toward the light. He struggled, roaring, pulling against them, but the power was absolute. The necroplasm in his veins burned, reacting violently. The armor around him writhed like something alive, its color deepening from black to crimson, then shifting again through shades of sickly green and shimmering violet. For an instant, his reflection split, 4 versions of himself, each tinted with a different hue, each whispering in a voice not his own. He fell to his knees as the light entered him. Images flashed before his eyes. Warfields drenched in the blood of Astartes, the laughter of demons echoing through ruined cathedrals, planets dissolving into warp storms, and at the center of it all a throne not made of gold but of bone and shadow, upon which no god sat. A throne waiting, the light faded. The helm dropped to the floor inert. Spawn looked down and saw that it was gone, dissolved into his armor. The mark on his chest now pulsed steadily, calm, complete. He felt no chains pulling him toward servitude, no whispers demanding worship. Instead, there was clarity, a connection not of obedience but awareness. He could feel them, the 4 watching from beyond the veil, but they were no longer distant, they had touched him. And in doing so, something within them had changed as well. He rose slowly. The corridors had stilled. The fortress was silent, The air no longer shifted in rhythm with his breath. The warp's attention had turned inward, folding upon itself like a serpent devouring its tail. He walked back the way he had come, though the path no longer resembled the one he entered by. It didn't matter. The fortress opened for him. When he stepped outside, the storm had cleared entirely. The stars above were visible, but not the stars of the Milky Way as he had known them. These burned with alien geometry, constellations twisting into sigils that made his eyes ache to follow. The warp still bled faintly through them, a shimmer that turned reality translucent at the edges. He stood beneath that false sky and realized he was no longer lost. He had been placed. Far in the distance, carried by the wind, came a sound like thunder. It was rhythmic, deliberate, the tread of armored feet, the war cry of men who no longer remembered what peace felt like. The scent of promethium and burning metal filled the air. The World Eaters had found him again. This time they would not meet an intruder. They would meet one of their own. The horizon trembled with fire. It began as a faint flicker, a dull shimmer in the dusk, but soon the wind carried the sound. Drums, metal striking metal, the chorus of rage that only one God's servants could sustain. The World Eaters were on the march again. Their formation was less a battle line and more an avalanche, guided by nothing but the promise of slaughter. Dust rose behind them like incense, and the thunder of their boots shook the bones of the dead still buried beneath the earth. Spawn stood at the crest of a ridge, cloak torn, chains coiling around his form like serpents awaiting a signal. The mark of chaos burned on his chest in time with the drum beat, not in pain this time, but recognition. The warp inside him vibrated with something primal, answering the song of battle as if it were an echo of his own heartbeat. He didn't understand it fully, only that the rhythm called to him the way blood calls to a wound. When the first of the berserkers crested the rise, their armor shone wet with gore. They were beasts sculpted in ceramite, their helmets painted with the 8-pointed star of chaos and Khorne's mark, their weapons howling with demonic hunger. Spawn didn't draw his chains. He didn't need to. They slowed when they saw him, and for a moment the silence was more violent than any battle cry. The lead warrior, a giant clad in crimson and brass, stepped forward. His armor was pitted, scarred, and his chain axe hung at his side, its teeth still dripping. The air around him shimmered faintly, a psychic distortion born of his rage. "You," he said, his voice carried through the Vox grill like a low growl. "We saw your work. You bled the weak in the name of nothing." Spawn tilted his head, the faint green glow beneath his mask flickering. "Not in the name of nothing." The warrior's helm tilted. "Then whose?" Spawn's gaze drifted briefly toward the sky, where the faint outline of the 8-pointed star shimmered in the fading light. "Whose do you serve?" he asked quietly. The berserker's laughter came out broken and joyous. "We serve the only truth left in this universe, blood, rage, the God who listens when we kill." Spawn's reply was soft, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "Then we understand each other." The silence that followed was not peace. It was recognition. Something primal moved between them, older than language, older than faith. The berserker raised his axe, not in challenge, but in salute. "Then you are brother," he said. "Khorne welcomes all who make offering." Spawn said nothing, but when the warband began to move again, he followed. The march through the wasteland felt like a pilgrimage. They passed through the remains of cities long dead, ruins devoured by rust and time, their cathedrals hollowed into echo chambers for screams. Spawn moved among them, watching, silent. The berserkers were not men anymore. They were hunger-given form. They fought amongst themselves when there were no enemies to kill, each duel brief, bloody, and forgotten. But when the horn sounded, they united with perfect instinct, bound not by discipline but by purpose. That night, when they made camp amid the bones of a collapsed hab block, Spawn stood apart. The fire they built was not made of wood or fuel, but of burning promethium and blood. It gave no warmth, only light, harsh, flickering, alive. The warriors knelt around it, their helmets removed, their faces pale and scarred. Some whispered prayers to Khorne, others laughed or wept, but all bled. Blood was their sacrament, and they spilled it freely, slicing their palms and letting the drops fall into the flames. Spawn felt the pull of it, the ritual, the unity, the purpose that radiated from them like heat. He understood it too easily. Rage was the one emotion that had never left him. Even in hell, even in the warp, It was the chain that tethered him to something resembling life. When one of the berserkers approached, his eyes were wide with the fever of devotion. "You bleed for no god," the warrior said, holding out his own blade. "Do you deny the gift?" Spawn looked at the blade. Its edge was chipped, its hilt wrapped in flayed skin. He reached out slowly, grasped it by the blade, and drew it across his palm. The wound sizzled. The necroplasm hissed as it met the metal. Blood, black, thick, and burning with unnatural fire, dripped into the flame. The fire changed color, turning deep red, then violet, then back to red again. The berserkers gasped. "He bleeds warp fire," one whispered. "He is touched." The leader stepped forward, the same warrior who had spoken before. He studied Spawn's face for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then you are chosen," he said simply. "You are what Khorne dreams of when he sleeps in the void." Spawn didn't answer. He stared into the fire, watching the colors twist and bleed into one another. The mark on his chest glowed faintly, reflecting in the flames. In the depths of his mind, the voice of the warp murmured again. Not as many voices this time, but as one. They would make you their champion. Would you let them? He ignored it. For now. When dawn came, though dawn was only a dimming of the storm, they marched again. This time Spawn took his place at the front beside the leader. Ahead lay the remains of a manufactorum, now occupied by the servants of another god. The World Eaters were not marching to conquer. They were marching to prove. The storm thickened as they approached. Spawn could smell the rot before he saw it, sweet, rancid, alive. The banners of Nurgle hung from the ruins, swaying gently in a wind that whispered like a dying breath. The Plague Marines awaited them, armored in filth and ruin, their bolters oozing slime, their laughter slow and heavy. The berserkers roared, and the field ignited in fury. Spawn charged with them, his chains screaming through the air. Each strike tore through armor and flesh alike, his power resonating with the rhythm of Khorne's song. For the first time in memory, he felt something like purpose, raw, simple, unburdened by thought. Kill, move, kill again. But amid the slaughter, a new sound emerged, a deep, wet chuckle that rolled through the smoke like thunder. A voice heavy with warmth and rot, so much anger in such a small soul. Spawn froze, blood and smoke swirling around him. The laughter deepened. You fight like one who fears what waits in silence. Shall I show you what peace looks like? And then the ground beneath him began to move. The corpses he had slain convulsed, rising slowly, their bodies stitched together by tendrils of decay. The battlefield reshaped itself into a grotesque garden, the ruins blooming with flesh and fungus. The air grew thick, cloying. Spawn's armor sizzled as spores clung to it, trying to root themselves in the necroplasm. He looked around, realizing that the battle was already lost. The berserkers continued to fight, but their enemies no longer died. They multiplied. He turned to the leader, who was laughing even as his throat was torn open. "Blood for the blood god," he screamed, and then he was gone, consumed by the tide. Spawn stood alone once more, the mark on his chest now flickering weakly, caught between the call of war and the embrace of decay. And as the garden grew around him, the voice of Nurgle whispered again, soft, fatherly, inescapable. "Do not struggle, my child. Even rage needs rest." The air filled with the scent of sweetness and rot, and the ground swallowed him whole. The earth itself seemed to breathe as it pulled him down, a slow, gluttonous inhale that dragged Spawn into the soil like prey into a predator's maw. The surface closed over him, sealing away the screams and gunfire, leaving behind only a muffled hum, the sound of a heartbeat too slow to belong to anything human. Darkness pressed against him thick as tar. The necroplasm within him fought it, flaring and twisting in resistance, but the corruption that surrounded him was not hostile. It was patient, it was affectionate. When his eyes opened, he was no longer buried in dirt, but submerged in liquid, a translucent, viscous green that pulsed with warmth. Around him floated shapes, half-formed bodies, fragments of armor, flowers made of flesh. The air, nor whatever passed for it, vibrated with quiet laughter. The voice that had beckoned him before spoke again, closer now, wrapping around his thoughts like a blanket. "You burn so fiercely, little flame. You fight the inevitable, the natural end of all things. But even fury must tire. Even hatred must sleep." Spawn tried to move, but the liquid held him like a lover's embrace. His chains twitched weakly. Their motion slowed as if through honey. "If this is peace," he growled, "you can keep it." The laughter deepened, rolling through the chamber like a tide. "Oh, my poor child, you misunderstand me. Peace is not absence. It is acceptance. Even the rot that claims the stars does not destroy, that transforms. Look around you," he did. The shapes that drifted in the fluid were no longer corpses. They had bloomed, grotesque but mesmerizing. Flowers of meat and bone opening to reveal faces twisted in serene smiles. Where decay should have smelled of death, there was instead a sweetness cloying and narcotic. For the briefest moment, Spawn felt the weight of his rage lighten. The constant vibration of fury that defined him dimmed, replaced by something dangerously close to calm. The voice continued, coaxing. "You have been remade so many times, haven't you? By hell's fire, by the warp's hunger, by your own refusal to die. Yet what has it brought you? Loneliness, grief. You wear your pain like armor because it is the only thing left that listens to you." Spawn gritted his teeth. "I don't need your pity." "No," the voice replied softly. "But you crave belonging, and I offer it freely. Khorne gave you purpose but no rest. Tzeentch would twist you until you forgot your own name. Slaanesh would drown you in your memories. But I would give you peace. You need not fight. You need not rage. You could simply be." He felt the pressure increasing around him. The necroplasm flickered, its usual violent glow softening into a dim bioluminescence. The mark on his chest pulsed erratically, caught between defiance and surrender. For a terrible heartbeat, he wondered what it would be like to stop resisting, to allow the decay to take him, to sink into that endless green tide where everything dissolved, where pain had no teeth. He almost let go. Then from deep within the haze, another sound intruded, faint at first, then growing. Metal striking metal, the rhythmic beat of the butcher's nails, the song of war. It started as a whisper in the distance, but it was enough. Spawn's armor flared crimson, burning away the liquid that sought to claim him. Steam and light erupted around him as the necroplasm rejected the infection, hardening into plates once more. The flowers screamed, their serene faces contorting in agony as his chains shredded them. The voice of Nurgle sighed, still gentle, almost sad. So much effort to remain in pain. So much fear of healing. "You could have been my favored son." Spawn rose through the liquid like a revenant, his armor leaving trails of fire in its wake. "I'm nobody's son," he said, his voice shaking the chamber. The green fluid boiled away around him, replaced by choking smoke. The calm sweetness of the air turned acrid, bitter with promethium and rot. The illusion shattered. He was standing once more amid ruin. The garden gone, the berserkers dead, the plague marines reduced to heaps of corroded armor. Above him the sky churned with black clouds shot through with lightning that bled color into the landscape. His armor dripped with the remnants of decay, sizzling where it touched. He fell to one knee, exhausted. The mark on his chest no longer glowed red nor green. It pulsed with a strange fusion of both, crimson veins weaving through moss-colored light. He could feel the gods watching again, their presence heavier than before. They had tasted his defiance, and it pleased them. When he looked down, he saw that his shadow no longer matched his body. It had grown larger, taller, its edges crowned with faint horns. For an instant, he thought it moved on its own. He blinked, and it returned to normal, but unease lingered. The warp was shaping him in ways even he could not perceive. The wind shifted. In it came a new voice, a colder, sharper, like a knife sliding between ribs. "You resist rot as you resisted rage. How long before you resist yourself?" Spawn froze. This was no voice of Nurgle. This one crackled like static, layered with whispers and laughter. He felt the temperature around him drop, reality bending at the edges. His chains stiffened as if in anticipation. "Tzeentch watches you now," the voice purred. "Chaos is not a god but a question, and you are an answer I have not yet written." The mark on his chest pulsed again, and he felt the dizzying rush of visions, futures branching like veins of lightning, each one ending differently. Some with him as a demon prince crowned in fire, others with him burned to ash beneath the Emperor's gaze, and some stranger still, his necroplasm intertwined with the Astronomican, his will igniting stars. He staggered, clutching his head. "Get out of me!" The laughter echoed bright and cruel. "Out of you? You misunderstand. You are already part of me." Reality twisted. The ground folded upward into walls, the air became glass, and behind it, shadows moved like oil across water. A figure stepped forward, tall, cloaked, its face hidden beneath a mask of feathers and flame. Its eyes were galaxies, shifting constantly, never the same twice. Spawn raised his chains, but the figure only extended a hand. "Come, Hellspawn. You have walked among rage and rot. Now walk among secrets. You were made by devils. Let a god make use of you." The words hung in the air like a spell. Around him, the world pulsed with color, turning from gray to a kaleidoscope of burning blues and purples. He felt gravity lose its meaning again. The line between flesh and spirit blurred, and somewhere, deep within him, the necroplasm whispered back. Not in defiance this time, but in curiosity. He took a step forward, and the world folded into light. The gift of Khorne was rage. The offer of Nurgle was peace. What awaited him now was far more dangerous. Tzeentch did not give gifts. He made bargains. He awoke in motion, suspended between dream and descent, his mind fracturing across colors that could not exist in mortal thought. The warp sang around him, a symphony of contradictions, heat and cold, silence and screaming. Truth folded into lies until they became one. Tzeentch's realm was not a place so much as a revelation, a truth no mind was meant to bear. It unfolded in spirals. Cities built upon the backs of words that redefined themselves as he watched. Rivers of liquid glass carrying the reflections of futures that would never be. Spawn hung above it all like an insect trapped in amber, the light bending around him as if even reality itself refused to look directly at what he had become. He remembered the garden, Nurgle's promise, the suffocating calm that had almost claimed him, and for a moment he longed for it. At least the decay had been still. This place was motion without purpose, chaos as intellect. Each breath felt like it carried a question, and every answer slipped through his fingers. His armor was no longer crimson or green, but an iridescent storm of color, shifting and breathing, the mark on his chest spinning slowly like an eye that could not close. Then came the voice. Not whispering this time, but layered, 100 tones woven into one. It was Tzeentch himself, or perhaps merely the echo of his thought. For no mortal form could withstand the true presence of the architect of fate. You resist as though resistance were still choice. Spawn turned slowly, though direction had no meaning here. The space around him folded, revealing a staircase of quills and bone descending into nothing. Upon it sat a figure, tall, robed in feathers that shimmered with stars, its face hidden behind a mask that changed with every glance. It smiled without moving. "You pulled me here," Spawn said, his voice raw, distorted. "Why?" The figure tilted its head. "Because you asked to understand even when you thought you did not. Because you seek to break your chains, and every soul that seeks freedom walks my paths in the end. I didn't ask for you. You didn't need to." The staircase collapsed into light, and suddenly they were standing, or what passed for standing, amid an impossible landscape. Towers grew sideways from rivers that flowed upward into clouds of solid glass. Books flitted through the air like insects, their pages filled with blue fire. And everywhere faces, countless, translucent, each whispering secrets that dissolved as soon as they were spoken. The others offered you what they are. Tzeentch continued, rage, decay, indulgence. I offer you what you could be. Spawn's chains tightened instinctively. I've heard that before. Every liar, every devil, every god says the same thing, that I could be more. The masked figure stepped closer. And yet you listen, because you know you are not done. You were forged to serve, but you defy. You were made to destroy, but you preserve your own will. You are contradiction incarnate, and contradiction is power. He moved faster than thought, closing the space between them, his hand grasping Spawn's armored shoulder. The contact burned, not pain, but revelation. Spawn saw visions flash through his mind. Armies marching beneath banners of stars that pulsed like living veins. The golden throne of Terra cracking, the Astronomican flickering like a dying sun. And at the center of it himself, standing above them all, neither god nor man, his necroplasmic light replacing the Emperor's own. He tore free, breathing hard. No, he said. I'm not your puppet. Tzeentch's laughter rolled through the air like 1,000 quills scratching parchment. You misunderstand me, Hellspawn. You cannot serve me. You already are me. The words struck like a blow. Around him, the world changed again. The towers melted, the sky folded into mirrors. Each reflection showed a different Spawn. one crowned in gold, one consumed by fire, one kneeling before corn, one dissolving into the embrace of Nurgle. Infinite possibilities, infinite failures. The reflections spoke in unison. You cannot kill what you do not understand. Spawn roared and shattered them. His chains lashed outward, breaking glass and air alike, scattering shards of futures that screamed as they fell. The fragments cut into his armor, into his flesh, each wound leaking not blood but light. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed. The figure stepped close again, now towering, now small, now everywhere at once. You rage against what you are because you still believe you were human. But humanity is not a virtue, it is a prison of flesh. You could unmake it. You could unmake everything. The mark on his chest pulsed violently. The world bent inward, folding around him. He felt his will flicker. The necroplasm inside him, the very essence of what he was, began to split apart. Each particle a thought. Each thought a possibility. You are not bound to one fate, the voice whispered. You could be the fifth. A new will in the pantheon, the god that chaos fears. The air tore open around him, spilling visions like ink. He saw demons bowing before him, saw the galaxy trembling under his will, saw himself rewriting the laws of creation, and for an instant he almost believed it. Then deep beneath the chaos another voice spoke, faint, old, and familiar. Not divine, not infernal, human. Al, remember who you were. The name hit him like a blade. Al Simmons, the soldier. The man who made the bargain, the one who died for love. Everything froze. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, the illusions dissolving around him. The laughter ceased. The feathers burned away. The sky went black. Spawn whispered, I remember. And Tsinch, or the thing that wore his voice, hissed like 1,000 wings tearing apart. Then you are still mine. Because memory is the cruelest kind of change. The world imploded. When sight returned, he was back on solid ground, or something like it. The soil was soft beneath his boots, pulsing faintly with life. The air smelled of damp rot, of rain and ruin. Trees rose around him, their bark like scabbed flesh, their leaves glistening with mucus. The sound of distant laughter drifted through the haze, warm and hollow. He knew this place. The Garden of Nurgle. But it was not the same as before. The decay was alive in a different way. More deliberate, less dreamlike. Every root, every vine seemed to grow toward him, and somewhere deeper in the mist he heard a slow, rhythmic breathing. Nurgle had not forgotten his defiance. The garden had grown to welcome him back. The air hung thick with sweetness, a scent that crawled through the lungs like ivy. It was not the stench of death, but the perfume of renewal, the odor of decay reborn as life. Spawn stood at the edge of a lake made of pus and gold, its surface rippling as if it breathed. Each wave that broke upon the shore left behind the whisper of voices, laughter, prayer, the sighs of the long dead. Above him, the sky was veiled in green light, trembling faintly as spores drifted down in lazy spirals, coating his armor with a dust that shimmered faintly before sinking into the plates. He felt no fear. Not yet, only weariness. His mind was still echoing with Tsinch's laughter, that shifting, impossible voice that had promised godhood and delivered only questions. Here, though, the world was silent in its own way. Not absence, but a fullness too heavy to bear. He walked forward slowly, his boots sinking into the spongy soil, the ground sighing with every step. Each breath he drew filled him with warmth, and with that warmth came the illusion of comfort. The garden was not what it seemed. It was neither nightmare nor paradise, but something far worse, acceptance. He had almost yielded to it once. In that moment when the liquid closed over his head, when the voice had called him child, he had thought he had escaped, but now he realized the truth. No one left the Garden of Nurgle. It waited, it grew, and it always remembered. Something moved in the mist ahead. Slow, deliberate, vast. The vines parted to reveal a figure lumbering toward him, immense and grotesque. Its skin sagged in folds, its belly split open to reveal a writhing mass of life. Flies buzzed around it in clouds that spoke in whispers, yet in its eyes there was something that chilled even the hellspawn. Kindness. My poor stubborn creation, the creature said, its voice like soil turning in spring. You fought so hard against my gift, but see how you've changed. Spawn raised his gaze. I'm not yours. The great unclean one chuckled, a sound like mud sliding down a hill. All rot returns to me, little ember. You may burn for a time, but even fire leaves ash, and ash feeds life. I don't want your life, Spawn hissed. His chains quivered, ready to strike. But you already have it. The demon stepped closer, extending one immense hand. Look at yourself, Spawn hesitated. Then he looked down. The armor that had once been pure darkness was now streaked with veins of greenish gold, pulsing faintly like veins beneath skin. Small blossoms, black and wet, had begun to sprout where his armor had cracked, opening and closing as if breathing. His gauntlet twitched, the surface rippling as something beneath it shifted. He ripped it free, throwing the piece to the ground, and from it burst a spray of spores that formed briefly into the shape of a face before dissolving. He staggered back. No! Why do you fight what makes you whole? The demon asked, its voice softening. You were made from death. You are sustained by corruption. You are not alive as mortals are, nor damned as demons are. You are fertile ground for both. Spawn's chains lashed out, striking the creature's belly, tearing through its flesh. But where they struck, new growth bloomed. Flowers made of teeth and laughter spreading along the wound until they reached the ground. The great unclean one laughed again, shaking the trees. So much fury. You remind me of the youngest of us, always hungry, always fighting. But even rage must rest. I will never rest. The demon's smile widened. Then you will rot standing. The ground beneath Spawn erupted, vines twisting around his legs, pulling him downward. He fought them, his chains burning with necroplasmic light, cutting through the tendrils, but every piece he severed became two more. They crawled up his armor, finding the cracks, the wounds, the tiny blossoms already blooming there. The rot wasn't attacking. It was claiming. The mark on his chest pulsed violently, alternating colors, crimson, green, violet, blue, as if the influence of all four gods now wrestled within him. He could feel their eyes upon him, Korn's fury, Nurgle's patience, Tzeentch's curiosity, Slaaneash's anticipation. None of them wanted to destroy him. They wanted him to choose. But there was another presence now. Something else, faint, vast, not of the warp. It shone beyond the green mists like the edge of a blade. For a moment the spores in the air froze and the great unclean one's smile faltered. It rumbled. The light that hates us all. Spawn looked up and saw it. Far above, piercing the clouds, was a shaft of gold. Not bright, but relentless. It cut through the warp's haze like judgment. The vines recoiled from it, the mist thinning. He felt the mark on his chest flare with pain, burning against his skin. The demon hissed, retreating into shadow. That light will break you, it warned. It breaks everything. You think you can walk from corruption to purity as though the two are separate? The light will show you what you are and what you are not. Spawn tore free of the vines, his armor steaming. The blossoms on his body blackened and fell away. He looked toward the distant glow and began to walk. The garden behind him wept. The ground sagged where he stepped, and the trees leaned inward as if mourning. You cannot leave us, my child, the great unclean one called softly. When the light rejects you, we will still be here. Spawn did not turn. He walked toward the light until the mist burned away, until the green gave way to gold, and then the warp shuddered, the air trembling with something deeper than power. He had crossed a threshold no demon had ever returned from. The light of the Emperor touched him. The light was agony. Not fire, not pain, but the slow unraveling of every lie he had ever told himself. It pierced through the last layers of the warp like a blade through silk, and Spawn felt the universe itself thin around him until all that remained was the steady hum of eternity. He stumbled through it, half blind, the necroplasm boiling beneath his armor. The mark on his chest flared white-hot. The colors of chaos stripped from it, leaving only a single blinding radiance that pulsed like a dying star. The storm was gone. The laughter of demons faded into whispers. For the first time since his fall, there was silence, true, absolute silence. It was suffocating. The ground beneath him turned from mud to marble, veined with gold that glowed from within. The air tasted of dust and incense, and in the distance he heard the faint hum of machinery, ancient, sacred, endless. He raised his head and saw it. Terra. Not the Terra of mortals, but the one glimpsed only in vision and myth. A wasteland of sanctity and ash, its skies filled with the ghosts of prayers. The ruins of cathedrals stretched across the horizon like the ribs of a long-dead god. And at the center, rising higher than sight, was the Golden Palace, the tomb of the master of mankind. Spawn fell to his knees. He didn't know how he had come here, or why the warp had allowed it. Perhaps this was not Terra at all. Perhaps it was a dream, or the last flicker of consciousness before oblivion. But the light that bathed him was real. It seared, it sanctified, and it hated everything that was not pure. The mark on his chest screamed. He clutched at it, but the pain drove him backward. His armor cracked, and from the fissures poured light and shadow both, the chaos within him clawing to escape, the divine refusing to yield. He roared, his voice echoing across the empty plains, shaking dust from the bones of angels. The light responded. It gathered itself, condensing into a single point above the horizon, a sun that did not move. From within it came a whisper, neither warm nor cold, but absolute. Why are you here? He didn't know whether it was a voice or simply thought-made sound. He looked up, his breath ragged. To end this. You cannot end what you are. The light brightened. His armor began to melt, exposing the necroplasm beneath. That cursed energy, equal parts life and death. The essence of hell and the warp intertwined. It screamed against the purity of the Emperor's light, unable to reconcile. Spawn staggered to his feet. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it. Nor did I. The words struck him like a blow. For a heartbeat, the light dimmed, and he saw, or thought he saw, a figure seated upon a throne of wires and gold, motionless, vast, and bound by machines that hummed with unending prayer. The Emperor of mankind, the corpse god. His face was hidden behind the glow, but Spawn could feel the weight of his regard, the gravity of a will so immense it bent reality. You, Spawn whispered. You're not dead. I am never dead. I am never alive. I am the choice made infinite. The words were not speech but revelation. They sank into him like nails. Spawn's knees buckled. His chains hung limp, their metal whispering prayers in tongues he did not know. I came to destroy the gods, he said. To break the chains they wrapped around everything, chaos, hell, you, all of it. And you believe you are not one of them? Spawn froze. The light pulsed, and he felt the weight of his journey unfold before him. Korn's rage, Nurgle's rot, Tzeentch's schemes, Slaanesh's whispers. Each had touched him, marked him, shaped him. Their essence now lived within his own. He had become the vessel of all that he despised. Every soul that seeks power becomes what it fears, the Emperor said. Even Icepawn's voice was barely a whisper. Then why do you keep it? The light flickered, softer now. Because without it there is only silence. Without will there is nothing. And nothing is worse than damnation. He looked up at the throne. The Emperor's form was blinding, but behind that radiance Spawn glimpsed something terrible. Not godhood, but decay. The flesh beneath the light was withered, cracked. The machinery that sustained him wept oil like blood. He was not life. He was persistence. And in that moment, Spawn understood. This was no god. This was the last man refusing to die. The light surged again, washing across the plain. You cannot fight me, Hellspawn. You cannot join me. You are a wound in creation, and wounds must close. Spawn spread his arms. Then close it. The light struck him like a hammer. His armor exploded into fragments of burning steel. His body tore apart, the necroplasm unraveling into smoke and light. He screamed, but there was no pain, only revelation. The warp within him clashed with the Emperor's will, the two forces spiraling, consuming each other. The sky cracked. The ground shuddered. The air filled with voices, demons shrieking in horror, angels crying in awe. The golden light turned red, the red turned black. And in the center of it all stood Spawn, no longer flesh, no longer armor, a figure of pure energy suspended between damnation and divinity. The Emperor's voice whispered, faint now, distant. You cannot serve both fire and shadow? Choose. Spawn's voice echoed like thunder. I choose neither. And he broke the light. It shattered like glass, scattering across the void. The warp screamed. Terra vanished. The stars bled. When the world reformed, he stood once more amid the ruins of a dead battlefield. The storm had returned, gentle now. The mark on his chest was gone. His armor was black once more, smooth, silent. The chains lay still. The voices of the gods were silent. Even the warp seemed to hold its breath. He looked at his hands. For the first time since he had fallen through that rift, there was no glow, no hum, no whisper, only quiet. He was free, but freedom, he realized, was colder than hell. He turned his gaze upward. The stars flickered, distant, watching. Somewhere in that endless void, the gods of chaos stirred uneasily. The Emperor's light still burned, dim but unbroken. The galaxy continued as it always had, uncaring. Spawn took a single step forward. The soil beneath his boots turned to glass. The horizon stretched endlessly, and the wind carried the faintest echo of laughter. Not cruel, not kind, just aware. The universe had witnessed something impossible. A soul had denied both damnation and divinity. And somewhere, in the dark beyond the stars, the gods whispered a single word. Interesting. The world felt hollow when the noise was gone. The silence stretched wider than any battlefield, a vacuum that swallowed even the faint echo of thought. Spawn stood alone at the edge of creation. The memory of the light still seared into his sight. The air shimmered faintly around him, fragile as if reality itself were struggling to remember its own shape after what he had done. There was no warp storm now, no divine choir, no laughter from the abyss. Even the voices that had haunted him since his first death were gone. He breathed once and the sound startled him. It was not the heavy rasp of the armored revenant he had been, but almost human. Broken, soft, uneven. His body was still wrapped in black armor, yet it felt weightless, its surface quiet, unreflective. The chains hung still, no longer twitching with hidden hunger. When he moved, they moved with him, not in rebellion or bloodlust, but simply in obedience. The horizon was gray, endless. The stars above were pinpricks of pallid light. The warp's colors faded to the dull hue of ash. For the first time in all his existence, Spawn wondered if he might finally have found something like peace, and realized how alien it felt. He began to walk, though there was nowhere to go. The ground beneath him cracked like glass with every step, ripples of faint light tracing his path. The galaxy lay hushed around him, the remnants of his unmaking still echoing through the unseen currents. The gods would not forget this. They could not. Chaos thrived on the immutable truth that all things could be corrupted, and he had denied that truth. He had stood before the corpse of a god and refused to kneel. But as he walked, a question gnawed at him. If he had destroyed his chains, what was left to hold him together? He thought of Earth then, not as it was, but as he remembered it. Wanda's face soft in the half-light, the scent of rain after the war, the promise he had broken when he sold his soul. Every memory came back stripped of color, pure in its pain. They were his last connection to the man he had once been, but even they felt distant now, like echoes from another life. Perhaps that was what freedom really was. Not peace, but isolation so vast it swallowed meaning itself. Something stirred at the edge of perception. Not a sound, but a shift, as if the air remembered how to breathe. Spawn turned. Far behind him, the cracked horizon rippled. Out of the dimness rose shapes faint and flickering. Shadows with too many limbs, faces like torn banners, wings of smoke and flame. Demons, they were not attacking. They were kneeling. He froze. There were hundreds at first, then thousands, the legions of the warp drawn by something they did not understand. Their forms flickered in and out of existence as if afraid of the place where he stood, yet unable to turn away. Even the strongest among them, bloodthirsters, plague hulks, lords of change, all bowed their heads in reverence or confusion. He realized what they saw. Not a man, not a demon, not a god. Something beyond their hierarchies, the silence that followed prayer, the void left when worship had nowhere to go. Spawn whispered, "No." The nearest demon shuddered, its form collapsing into dust. The others recoiled but did not flee. They trembled like moths circling a flame, drawn to the contradiction. He raised his hand and the air bent around it. The power was still there, but it felt different, restrained, almost reluctant. The necroplasm that had once surged like wildfire now burned cold and blue, an energy that wanted neither to create nor to destroy. He could feel its hunger, but it waited for his will. For the first time, it was his completely. "You want a master," he said softly. "You always have. But I'm done with thrones." The statement rippled through the field like thunder. The demons howled, not in defiance, but in mourning. They fell apart, their forms disintegrating into sparks that drifted upward, absorbed by the fading sky. The last to vanish was enormous, and a winged beast with a skull for a face. It looked at him in silence and then bowed its head before dissolving into ash. The wind returned, carrying nothing but dust and faint echoes. He stood alone again, surrounded by emptiness. And yet, for all its emptiness, the silence was no longer cruel. It was waiting. Spawn looked up. Beyond the thin clouds, he thought he saw something move. Not light, not shadow, but the faint outline of possibility. The universe itself, reshaping to accommodate what it could not define. A presence brushed his thoughts then, familiar and distant. The voice of the warp, no longer screaming, no longer tempting. "You have broken the chain," it said, quiet as breath. But the chain was also the bridge. He closed his eyes. "Then I will walk without it. And if the gods return, let them." He turned away from the sky. The ground beneath his feet began to harden, the cracks sealing as he moved. Behind him, the faint shimmer of the warp's veil pulsed once as if exhaling. The worlds beyond would never be the same. The gods diminished, the emperor diminished. The balance between faith and damnation forever altered by one soul's refusal to choose. Spawn walked until the horizon folded into light. There was no destination now, only movement, not as penance, not as purpose, but as existence itself. The faint hum of the galaxy rose around him like a heartbeat. Somewhere far away on Terra, or perhaps only in memory, a figure upon a throne opened its eyes for the first time in 10,000 years. And in the stillness that followed, both man and monster understood the same truth. There are powers older than gods, and sometimes the smallest defiance is enough to make eternity hesitate. The wind carried that truth through the ruins, through the dying stars, through the infinite dark, a whisper that no demon or angel could silence. He walked on, and behind him, unseen, the universe began to heal.